Welcome everyone to our February Cord Connects. My name is Dan Egan, and I'm a member at large on the board of directors, and I co-chair the Cord Connect series with Marianne Howie, who is working clinically today, but can't be here. And we are incredibly excited to have a former Cord president, Dr. Pamela Dyne, here with us today from UCLA Olive View. Talking about, as you'll see, wellness in the program director, or through the program director lens mostly, which is a nice turn for us, I think. My disclosure is that I'm enjoying my wellness in the Riviera Maya right now, and so I will be going off video as we enjoy this. So Dr. Dyne is 25 years as a GME leader and former Cord president, as I just briefly mentioned, and has capitalized on her passion for self-development and recently pivoted her academic direction during the COVID pandemic towards professional well-being. She sought additional training and became a certified life, health, and wellness coach, and then a certified chief wellness officer. And she is now the chief physician wellness officer at Olive View UCLA Medical Center. And we're super excited to have Dr. Dyne here with us today to share some thoughts on this really important topic that I don't think we paid enough attention to. And so here we are to give some time for ourselves. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Dyne.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really wonderful to see you all and to talk to you about something that I have learned a lot about recently in the last couple of years, and to share my perspective on what professional well-being really is and what you as program directors can do to really lean into the well-being of yourself and your learners with synergy. So I'm going to share my slides. And hopefully this will work. All right. Are we good? Can you guys see that? Yeah. All right. Thanks. Perfect. So this is the title of my talk. Well-being of learners and colleagues and learner professional development are both part of the Clinician Educator Milestones. How can these be good for my well-being and my professional development as a residency program leader? So that's what we're going to talk about. And I have some disclosures that Dan just alluded to. So I have become trained and certified as a life coach with 2 different certifications, both from the Life Coach School and from Well Coaches. I'm almost done with my certification from Well Coaches. And then I became a certified chief wellness officer, which is a thing. And I learned a lot in that training, and much of that is what I'm going to share with you. In terms of my own work, I coach very little on the side as a independent contractor, as a life and personal development coach for an organization called Coaching for Institutions, which is where I get some experience as a coach and get to lean into what it's really like on the ground as a doctor out there. It's fascinating. So these are the objectives for the talk. We're going to talk about what physician well-being and burnout are and actually are not. We're going to talk about the differences between coaching, mentoring, and advising. And then we're going to talk about how, as residency program leaders, you can actually improve your own well-being and mitigate your own burnout through the process of helping others, coaching, mentoring, and advising learners and peers. So it's a lot of stuff, ground to cover, but that's what we're gonna do. So have you guys heard of the Clinician Educator Milestone Project? This came out in August of 2022, and it's a joint initiative of all these big organizations that we all bow to, and they came out with this really ambitious project to, I think, in the heart, to help clinician educators in general understand their roles. But it sounds really daunting. There's actually a lot of them. There's 4 main pillars: educational theory and practice with 11 competencies within it. Well-being, pretty cool that that's one of them. EDI in the learning environment, also really great that that's in there. And administration, and there's 3 different competencies under there. So I became aware of these milestones, and I wanted to, and one of them was well-being. I'm like, oh, I better learn more about this. And then it turned out that there's something relevant in the educational theory and practice part as well. So these are what they are. So here is the well-being milestone. So I want you to take a look at this and see just stare at that, see what you think, where you fall on this right now as a sort of like baseline for today. So the level one, you're all familiar with milestones. It's the same thing. Level one is the entry level. Describe the relationship between well-being, burnout, learning, and patient safety. Interesting that that's part of it. That may be surprising. All the way up to as it goes to the right, as people gain more confidence. So that's the well-being one. And that sounds like pretty daunting. Like, what the heck? How am I supposed to know all this stuff and be able to, teach this too and model it? That's why we're talking. And here's the educational theory and practice one that is relevant to what we're going to talk about as well in terms of learner professional development. So what's the difference between coaching, sponsoring, advising, mentoring, and the continuous professional development of learners? And then all the way up to the right. So I suspect that most of you are feeling like pretty overwhelmed by these topics because that's a lot of content. Like, what? I have so much to do as a program director. How am I supposed to, and as an education leader, how am I supposed to also know this stuff? So this is actually the universal pillar of well-being in this same milestones. And this one, you probably, if you looked at this, you probably could feel pretty confident that you are somewhere on here, at least in terms of, you probably know what the professional well-being support are at your institution. You already do this. You respond proactively to emotional challenges with your learners, et cetera. So this one, I suspect you're probably feeling pretty good at, but that second level one, there's a lot there. So that's what we're going to talk about. So don't worry. Okay. So with that as a backdrop, let's start with what is well-being or wellness? And, is there really a difference between wellness and well-being? For the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to say no, because it's trivial, it's really semantics. So I would just want you to ponder in your head, what is the difference between what is well-being or wellness? And it's really, the quality of one's life, right? It's the quality of one's life. Are they thriving versus just barely surviving? And I think that that concept there is a pretty good summary of what well-being really is. It's one's quality of life. And there's a lot of components that go into that, right? So there's your mental health, there's your physical health, right? That's pretty straightforward. We're, as physicians, pretty aware of those things. One's financial health, right? How much do they worry about their finances? Is that something that causes a lot of stress? For many people, finances are a real stressful thing. And so that can be very destabilizing and really affect one's quality of life, of course. So, and then there's a couple other things. So one's relationships and connectedness, that definitely plays a factor into one's well-being and their quality of life. And then also driving meaning and personal accomplishment for work, right? So this is how I conceptualize the most important factors that sort of define one's quality of life: their work, their relationships, their health, and their finances. So it's kind of a circle. And so keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard of work-life balance. Is that a term that you like? Is that a term that bothers you? Fiona's shaking her head no. I appreciate you having your camera on so I can see your smiling face and hopefully your cute laugh at some point. Anyway, so work-life balance is one of these polarizing terms, right? Like, oh, we feel like, we're supposed to have this work-life balance, and it's supposed to, balance means, something balances, right? They have equal weight. And that's really just causes a lot of dysphoria and angst in people like us, right? Who really pour a lot into our work, and such that it, then you get all this guilt about like, well, where's the rest of my life? Because I spend all this time on work, but I like it. I like what I'm doing and I don't feel bad about it, And so the concept that balance, it's supposed to be balanced is kind of like, I think, doing us a big disservice. I prefer to think about it in terms of, like how much space there is on your phone or your computer. And in this particular picture, there's 128 gigabytes. And, a lot of it is used up by system data, and then, you have control over how much you spend on other things. This, I think, is a kind of a better analogy for like how you can think about your life if there's 168 hours in the week and how much time you're spending and how much emotional energy you're spending on various aspects of it. This is going to shift at different phases of your life too. Like right now, my kids are grown up and not in the house. And so I spend, a lot of thought thinking about them, but not much time, actually doing things for them. But that was very different when I was a residency director and my kids were young. And so, these colored bars, shift a lot over time. And I think that's a kind of a better analogy. But there's another analogy. So on the playground equipment spectrum, so we got the merry-go-round, and you know how these things work, right? The kids or people or pets, hopefully not, get on the merry-go-round and they hold on, and then somebody's spinning it, and the weakest link goes flying off because of centripetal force. That's how that works. And so if you think about all the various aspects of your life being on the different spokes here, how do you make sure that everything stays on and it has, especially when it gets going really fast? That's another sort of like mental image of work and the rest of your life staying in control. So I like the merry-go-round a lot because it actually reminds me of this other thing called a wellness wheel. So this is a concept where, and this is a useful exercise to do with your trainees or your peers or yourself, of course. You can take a circle, put these spokes on there, and you can put whatever is of value to you on the different spokes. So this is an example that, that I just found online where it's pre-populated with all these different aspects on the spokes. And, that most people feel like are pretty important and representative. So what you choose to put on the spokes, like physical health, mental health, relationships, et cetera, speaks to your values, right? And then also like what you don't put on the spokes might show you your blind spot. Like if it didn't occur to you to put like finances on there, that definitely speaks to your blind spot there, right? Because we all have to worry about finances, even if we have plenty of cash flow, or if it didn't occur to you to put recreation on there, having fun, having hobbies, that might speak to something you might, consider, as an area you're not focusing on right now. Not saying you necessarily should, but it's an interesting thing to compare, for different people and go through this as an exercise with your trainees. So so here's how this works. So I went ahead and put my own, so what you do is you put where, how important the thing is to you on the spokes, like going out towards the, along the radius. So for me, my physical health is of a lot of importance right now. I spend a lot of time exercising, making sure I get quality sleep. This is like something that's evolved a lot over the past couple of years. As I've gotten older, I certainly pay a lot of attention to my mindset. That's one of the things you do when you become a coach, is you spend a lot of time thinking about your thoughts, metacognition. My family, as I had mentioned, my kids are grown, so I certainly spend some time, but not a lot of energy, but not a lot of time related to my kids and my marriage, et cetera. I try and have some fun. So basically you get the idea. I'm still spending a lot of time on my career, which is just fine. So you get the idea. You put where you decide what you're going to put on the spokes, and then you decide, how much importance they're taking for you and at this particular moment. And then you just look at it and you go, and then you can do this over time, and people can share and compare, and it's really good to just think about where you're spending your energy. So that's the wellness wheel. And if you think about it like the merry-go-round, then you get my analogy there. Okay, so we all, undoubtedly spend a lot of time on work. And that is a good thing, because we chose a career in academics, we chose a career in helping learners and creating educational programs and GME leadership. And, it takes a lot of time to do all that. And so don't ever, I really want you to not feel bad, like I'm spending too much time on work if it's what you love doing. Okay. So this concept is the Ikigai, and Diane Birnbaumer actually talked about this at ACEP. For anybody who was at her talk, this will sound familiar, but this is this Japanese concept of reason for being is what Ikigai is. And so if you look at it, you can think about, this is really great for counseling like young people who are trying to figure out what they're going to do with their life in terms of a career. And it's also good to come back to for people when they kind of get a little muddled with like, oh my God, I'm struggling, like the things are falling off the merry-go-round and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And how do I figure out how to center myself and reprioritize what I really find meaning in terms of my professional career? So the idea is that there are 4 quadrants. There's what you're good at, right? There's what you love. There's what the world needs. And then there's, what you get paid for, what one can get paid for. And the overlap of all these things, and in the center where all 4 of them are resonating, is this Ikigai, the reason for being, one's true, calling. So most of us chose emergency medicine and to be in ACGME leadership because we love it. It needs to be done. Hopefully we're good at it, or we feel like we're good at it, and turns out we can get paid. And so that's, I think, a really great way to sort of conceptualize like the value of what you've chosen to do with your time. And maybe there's, and if it's not really feeling like, if any of these 4 parts are not really in sync or really resonating, then it can feel really out of balance. But if you are, if you go back to the center of like, why did I choose this crazy job? This is why, right? Because it really does have a lot of meaning for you, and you're good at it, and you love it, and the world needs it, and you can get paid. So just keep that in mind, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what is physician well-being. And so there are some things that are not physician well-being. Okay. So, you probably get, like me, like our health system at UCLA sends out Wellness Wednesday, and it's this email full of stuff, like things to be distracting. And some of them are great, like a little discount to a gym or whatever. But, some of them are a recipe, and there's just a lot of stuff that's put out under the guise of, this is for your well-being. And I want to tell you what things are, what that means to me. So our absolutely amazing residency coordinator, Jen Cassidy, sent out an email a couple of weeks ago with a link to the San Diego Zoo website, because under the guise of, would you like some wellness? And this is pretty great. So like I went to the website, you click on this thing that says videos, and you get webcams, live webcams of all the different animals at the San Diego Zoo. How fun is that, right? So I sent this to my kids. I'm like, this is so fun. You can watch the penguins. And my son, who's like such a quick wit, says, that's interesting. The penguins are sponsored by Alaska Airlines. And I'm like, well, penguins, Alaska, people think of them that way. He goes, yeah, but wouldn't you think an airline would want to sponsor a bird that can like fly? Like, okay. Yes, that's pretty funny. But anyway, the reason I'm telling you about this is, yes, I think my son is brilliant. But secondly, because this is a really fun distraction, right? Like shopping and making chocolate chip cookies and Netflix and, Instagram and things like that, they're really good distractions, and they have their place, but they're not, I personally don't think these are something that should be considered a well-being activity. What it really is a distraction from what you need to be, it's a way to procrastinate. And that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with procrastinating, but we should call it what it is, which is procrastinating, and relaxing, which is fine too, but that's not necessarily, I personally don't subscribe to the idea that distraction activities or things that are just purely relaxing by yourself are always in the realm of well-being. Some people need that stuff. Other people, they just use it to put off things that they're afraid of doing, or like, oh, I'm supposed to be writing a lecture. I'd rather watch the pandas, because I have perfectionist thinking. And if I this is why we procrastinate, a lot of us, because of perfectionist thinking. And that's a coachy concept, which I can go into another time if you'd like. This kind of thing comes from my hospital every week. And this is definitely not physician well-being, but this is the Olive View Medical Center wellness calendar meant for employees. This comes from the hospital every single week. And this is the calendar for January and February. Check this out. They're having light stretching for half an hour from 9 to 9:30. Yeah, and coloring for adults from 3 to 4 in the middle of the workday. Who the heck can go to these things? This pisses me off, frankly, that I don't even know what upcycling is, but anyway, I can never go because it's from 10 to 12 on a weekday. But this pisses me off that this is sent out as an employee wellness activities. These are just distractions that are, anyway. So my point of telling you all this stuff is that well-being, distraction activities and things that basically allow you to sort of procrastinate by yourself are not really are not well-being activities. In fact, they kind of make me more annoyed than anything else, this kind of stuff. Well, we can talk about this later, but this is my perspective on what's not well-being, is things that basically allow you more time to procrastinate. Okay, let's talk a little bit about burnout. I'm sure you've heard of it. I suspect you probably have felt it, right? So what is burnout? So it is actually an occupational phenomenon. The World Health Organization defines burnout as an occupational phenomenon characterized by emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and depersonalization, and feelings of ineffectiveness or decreased personal achievement at work, right? It has an ICD-11 code, but it's not actually a medical or psychiatric condition. So that's pretty interesting, right? So it's thought to be a response to the mismatch between the working condition, the job, and the worker, and it harms the worker, right? And Christine Maslach, the inventor of the Maslach burnout inventory, that's how she describes burnout. So she ought to know. And there's this other really famous person, okay, there we go, named Christine Sinsky, who's she's actually the vice president of the AMA for professional engagement or something like that. And she defines burnout as, what she says is burnout manifests in individuals, but originates in systems. It's not a deficiency in the resiliency of the physician, rather it's due to the systems in which the physicians work. Okay, so I'm here to tell you that burnout is not the individual's fault who is experiencing it, right? It's a problem with the system they work in, and a mismatch of expectations. So that expectations minus reality thing, that's what happens with burnout. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And so here's where the milestone for well-being comes in. So we've talked about what well-being is and what burnout is, and now we're going to sort of soon we're going to talk about what this has to do with patient safety. All right, so now I'm getting into parts where what I've learned from my Chief Wellness Officer course is a lot about institutional well-being platforms as opposed to individual level well-being stuff. So there are these 9 things that are called the drivers of burnout and engagement. So on the left, we've got burnout as exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficiency or ineffectiveness. And that's what we just talked about as being the characteristics of burnout. And the opposite of burnout is actually like professional engagement, right? So people feel vigor, they're dedicated, they're absorbed in the process, right? When, they're in a flow state. So when these 9 drivers are really humming and all working, the person is engaged. When they're not, when they're less optimized, then they go towards burnout. So check these out. So meaning in work, we talked about that ikigai, right? So that's what's supposed to be, where we find our meaning in work, but a lot of times it gets diluted and forgotten. And we forget why we're doing what we're doing. Right. And maybe the workload and job demands are not optimal. The workload exceeds the time available. maybe the individual wants to have more control and flexibility than they have, but and that's frustrating or optimized for them. Work-life integration. This is something we're just never going to, if a person's got a lot of personal obligations and too much work to do, that can result in a lot of distress, right? Community and support at work. So I think the idea of why those silly workforce well-being activities exist at all of you is the idea to create community, and that has value, but if no one can go, it's annoying, right? Does the organization actually have a culture that and values that is aligned with the individuals? This is an interesting dynamic there, and isn't always optimized, especially depending on the how they're supporting their physicians. And then efficiency and resources. So this is efficiency of practice kind of stuff. So how clunky is it to do your job if you have to constantly think about a pebble in your shoe? Like, you can have a little annoying pebble in your shoe and you can walk for miles on it, but after probably like the 5th or 6th or 10th mile on it, it feels like a boulder, and you're gonna have to sit down and deal with that. So it's the same pebble, it just feels much more magnified. So that's the efficiency of practice, or the stupid stuff that can really be in the way of work. This stupid stuff can really interfere. You guys all know, we are the specialty of MacGyvering stuff, right? When something's broken, we're just going to figure out how to fix it. But literally, if everything you do requires you to, rejigger that, it might get a little fatiguing. But for other specialties, they're not wired the same way as we are. And so if something doesn't work, it can be really super frustrating. And so these are the 9 drivers of burnout. And this is the work of Tate Shanafelt and colleagues. Tate Shanafelt is at Stanford now, and he's sort of like the originator of the concept of a chief wellness officer, and has done most of the writing and work on this. So just think about that. So as a program director, as a program leader, what do you have control over for your trainees and for your peers and for yourself, right? This is where you get some synergy. So, if you're feeling like your demands are exceeding, your workload is exceeding your available time, what can you dish off, right? Where can you find some synergy with somebody else's desires to be part of something? How can you come back to that? If there's a whole bunch of stupid stuff that's in your way, what can you do is there something you can be empowered to fix? Or for your trainees, if there's something that's incredibly frustrating for them, is there a way that you can empower them to help fix the problem, so to speak, and then feel really good about that? Are you communicating your organizational culture and values in a way that reminds people what they really are, and so that they can maintain meaning in work? So the repercussions of burnout are pretty significant. I suspect you're probably familiar with these ideas, but there are personal repercussions and professional repercussions. So on the personal side, so while burnout is not a psychiatric condition at all, it's an occupational phenomenon, as I said, there's some bidirectionality with mental health stuff. So someone who already has depression or anxiety, but in particular depression, can be more prone to having burnout. And someone who's burned out, who might have a tendency towards depression, or who had depression in the past, if they're burned out, that can exacerbate their depression as well. So there's some bidirectionality there. Similarly with substance use and alcohol, and the catastrophic consequence of suicide, and broken relationships, right? So if you're really frustrated at work and totally burned out, coming home to the proverbial kick the dog can really be a problem. A lot of divorce happened over the course of the pandemic because of intensivists being totally burned out from just the sheer workload that they were doing. I know a couple of them actually. And then from a professional standpoint, their burnout results in physician turnover. People quit their jobs. Obviously, that's quite costly to the organization and unfortunate for the individual involved. Excuse me. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I woke up with a cold today. So yeah. If someone is burned out, there's actually really good literature that shows that they have decreased professional productivity and also there's more patient errors and decreased quality of care. And decreased patient satisfaction. So this is really important to the health system, which is why, or should be really important to the health system, which is why, the concept of a chief wellness officer was kind of conceived of as, and a wellness leader of this sort can really help address the institution's efforts towards improving these metrics and improving these things so that there aren't more physician statistics of burnout. So what does that look like, an institutional well-being platform? So this is the concept of the Stanford model of professional fulfillment, also coined by Tate Shanafelt, and it's a trademarked thing. So professional fulfillment, somewhat like engagement, right, is a concept that is about a quarter personal resilience. We're all, physicians as a demographic are quite resilient. But the rest of the pie is a culture of wellness. And so that's like, how does do the leaders of the organization communicate their professional values? Do they support the people to whom they serve? Do they, how good is the leadership, basically? And are they able to create a culture of safety and psychological safety at the institution? That's what goes into the culture of wellness. And then efficiency of practice is the stupid stuff, right? In fact, the AMA calls it stupid stuff. Believe it or not, there's a whole module on the AMA website about getting rid of stupid stuff, GROSS, gross, which I think is amazing. And these are the pebbles in the shoe. And this is like, there needs to be a printer. If there was just a printer, so I could print the labels for the thing that I have to go do right here next to my workstation, so that I don't have to walk, 100 steps to go get the printer, go get the labels, then my life would be a lot easier. Like, there's zillions and zillions of examples of all these little stupid things that and policies as well. They're actually much more relevant for policies, but the stupid policies. We all have, clunky EMRs, and how much can they be more optimized? Those kinds of things. So all of these things go into an individual's sense of professional fulfillment, their personal resilience, the institution's culture of wellness, and how much stupid stuff, minimizing the stupid stuff, is the concept here. Another way of looking at it is, how do you bolster an individual who has a lot of self-determination, feels like they tend to be very engaged, right? If you get to decide, you are determined, you feel like you have control and enjoy what you're doing, then you're humming, right? You're in flow state. And what optimizes one's sense of self-determination are this ABCD. So autonomy, belonging, right? That's all. Feeling like you belong in the environment, and that you're professionally competent, and that you're deriving deep meaning from the experience. So these four things are autonomy, belonging, competence, and deep meaning. This is what you as a residency leader can really lean into in terms of your trainees. And in so doing, actually, it helps you as well, which is, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so we had just going to go back for a sec, hopefully. So that we have the concept of the professional fulfillment, right? Think about what you as a program leader can do in your own training program to optimize this for your trainees and for your peers and for yourself. And this as well together. So one sense of autonomy, residency, they don't have a lot of autonomy, but and they don't expect to, right? They don't expect to have a lot of choice in what they do, but they might want to. And so if there's something you can, some way you can give them more autonomy, then they will, generally speaking, want that, right? Belonging, that piece is so important in terms of like equity, diversity, inclusion, imposter feelings, all of those big items that we, feel are very strongly about. That's where they come in, is that the individual feels like they belong there. That, clearly trainees are learning to be competent, but to the extent that you can they're all competent at different levels, right? That's the milestones, right? And so reinforcing what they're competent in, and helping everybody to feel like they're on their path in learning is what that's all about. You all know that. But the deep meaning piece, can't be overstated. This is, can you amplify lives, great cases where lives were saved? Can you really why we're here doing this great work? Case conferences tend to be about, like sometimes they, especially in surgical programs or those kinds of places where situations where their case conferences often tend to be, ways in which people messed up. But if you can amplify ways in which people's lives are really enhanced by what we're actually doing, then, look for ways to amplify the deep meaning of what we're doing. Okay, so now we're going to transition to talking about this learner professional development and coaching, sponsoring, advising, mentoring, and what that has to do with learner professional development and yourself, right? So let's talk a little bit about the difference between advising, mentoring, and coaching. Okay, you're familiar with all these words. I know you are, right? So advising, you know what that is, right? The advisee asks, the advisor advises based on the advisor's knowledge, skills, experience, bias, right? It's very, the more senior person is sort of leading the discussion. Certainly the advisee will ask their questions, but they're coming to the advisor for that sort of thing. Like, I want your advice. Mentoring is pretty similar, right? The mentor drives the conversation based on their own values and experience and ideas. And helps the learner or mentee, come up with solutions. It's not, you're very familiar with this. You do them all the time. It's part and parcel of being in academics. So coaching is a confusing word because I'm sure, undoubtedly familiar with skill-based coaching, right? So this is, athletes, musicians, actor, teaching psychomotor skills, right? Skill-based coaching is where the coach uses their knowledge and experience to improve somebody else's skills, right? It's kind of unidirectional from the coach down. There's a lot of fine-tuning the details to help the person be efficient. And this is fantastic. Most people are very familiar with this concept if they've been an athlete or observed athletes, and we do this too with teaching chest tubes and LPs and, all the things that we do. Very familiar with that. That's a different type of coaching than professional development coaching. All right. So professional development coaching or life coaching, however you want to call it, is really very much, it's very different. It's learner driven, right? It's based on the learner or the client, however you want to call them, their goals. And the coach uses specific coaching techniques, kind of a coach approach to, which is really asking questions to help the client or learner identify what they want, what their strengths are, what their obstacles are, what their blind spots are, their self-limiting beliefs, and to come up with their own solutions. It's a very different thing than the type of coaching that you're, accustomed to with the skill-based coaching. Okay, so it's actually not, it's not that hard, and it's really, well, it's hard and it's not hard, right? It's conceptually easy to just teach somebody to just ask questions and listen instead of stepping into the void of answering for, when people are thinking. But that's a coach approach, right? It's positive psychology. It's a excuse me. It's not. It's positive psychology based and is very it's very fun to do on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So here's a resident example. So the resident says, and I suspect you will all have, experienced this sort of thing. The resident says, I have no idea if I'm performing at the level I should be. My evaluations don't really say anything. They all say I'm doing fine, but what does that mean, right? Does that sound like a familiar concept? Yes. Right. So a mentor will say, well, your evaluations are all fine. Everybody feels this way. You're doing fine. I'm sure you've heard yourself say that before. I've said this many times. Everything's fine. But a coach might say, well, where do you feel like you're doing well? And what do you think, when you think about an ideal resident at your level, what should they be doing? What would that mean? And how do you, where do you want to be? What are your goals? Do you want to be the ideal resident? Are you comfortable with being sort of like in the middle? And where do you think you're performing? How do you think you're performing based on your experience? How does it, here's another provocative question. How do you feel when you think the thought, I have no idea how I'm performing? It's kind of a disempowering thought, right? So is there something you could think that might result in more confidence, in more empowerment? So it sounds, the way I just described it sounds a little woo. I realize that that's not for everyone, but this way of helping the learner to identify their own goals and see their own thoughts, right? And realize that their thoughts are theirs and can be changed, right? So if the person says, the thought is, I don't know how I'm doing, right? They could easily think something else, like, I'm on my path, I'm doing fine. And that feels differently to the person, right? It feels very like overwhelming to think, I don't know how I'm doing, I have no idea, versus I'm on my path is a thought that leads to a feeling of confidence and competence and growth. So that's the idea, is helping people to identify their thoughts so that they can decide if they want to keep them or not, and think something else instead. Means the same thing, but it feels very, very different. So you might be wondering, Pam, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? Right? Reasonable thing to think, reasonable thing to wonder. So this is a sort of a quick and dirty about what the differences are, right? So coaching is very much based on the future focus. Where does the person want to be? And it can help them set goals and figure out how to create their own results. So say, for example, a trainee might say, I really, want to do better on the in-training exam. How am I? And so, you could see one's hat, you could just tell them, you could give them a reading plan, right? That's not coaching though, but you could ask the trainee, how do you want to go about doing that? And let's come up with a plan together and have them drive it. A lot of people talk about other types of goals like fitness goals or any sort of thing. It starts from the concept though, that the client or the coachee has the answers. They're the expert in themselves, right? And it's usually taking somebody from functioning to succeeding. And there's a lot of storytelling involved. It's, it's a very much of a back and forth with the coach sometimes sharing their own successes or what they've seen in other people, as opposed to therapy, which often addresses the events in the past, not always, but often addresses events in the past. It often takes a client from sort of non-functioning to functioning, as opposed to functioning to succeeding. Therapy is appropriate for someone who's experienced trauma. It's used to heal trauma. Coaching is not a good technique for trauma. It can, in fact, actually be re-traumatizing to the individual. So this is really important that the coach knows their boundaries and limits there. Obviously, in therapy, a client may have a mental health diagnosis. And in therapy, the therapist reveals very little about themselves. That's not how it's supposed to go. So that's a quick and dirty about the differences between coaching and therapy. Okay, so I had some objectives at the beginning. We were going to talk about what physician well-being and burnout are or are not. We've talked about that. We were going to discuss the differences between coaching and mentoring and advising and how they're all useful for professional development. We've talked about that. So now I promised you we'd talk a little bit about how, as program leaders, you can improve your own well-being and mitigate your own burnout through the process of learning about these things and actually doing them. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go back to the drivers of burnout and engagement. So I want you to, again, look at these things and think about your own life and think about your program and your trainees and your peers, and think about what you have control, what you can modify, where are these things on your wellness wheel, so to speak, or on your merry-go-round, and what can be optimized for an individual or for the group, for the program? And how can that, if you're sensing that your program has that there are a lot of burned out residents, maybe going to really investigating, or peers, or in yourself, right? Maybe going and investigating which of these, if any of these drivers are mutable, so that you can optimize them and move people towards the right, into being more engaged. I was poo-pooing the idea of, activities as being distraction, but I didn't really mean that activities that create belonging and cohesiveness and shared experiences and creating memories. That's not what I was getting at. Those activities are very important because they create community, and that's really important in a residency program. And we all lost a lot of that during lockdown. So to the extent that you're able to bring those back, a couple of times a year at retreats or whatever, that's the main reason for that, right? So think about those different things. Are there efficiencies or resources that you can investigate? And you as a program director don't have to solve all the world's problems, but at least create some conversations around what the residents need. I'm sure they're telling you. So does anybody know who Hannah Corbin is? Raise your hand if you know who Hannah Corbin is. She is a Peloton instructor. Rebecca was thinking, I didn't think Pam could get through a talk without talking about Peloton, and she's right. But she said this in a ride recently, and I just thought this was perfect for this concept. So if we replace I with we, then illness becomes wellness. I know it's cheesy, but it's really cute because it's cute, but the idea here, and this is where your own well-being gets enhanced by the process, by all these things we've been talking about, is by you helping somebody else to understand the nature of their burnout, to understand the nature of what's driving that, where on those drivers we were. That can help you to really look at yourself as well. And this is the whole bidirectionality of helping other people feels really good, right? So if you can be working on your program's well-being, ideally, if you're really looking at it from a big picture and what those drivers were, you're also going to feel the benefit yourself. And I can tell you that this is really true from having gone through kind of a lifetime of, so to speak, of program leadership and GME leadership in general. Is the more that I lean into helping other people to feel, to solve their problems, the more engagement I felt personally. So again, back to the Stanford model of professional fulfillment. So I haven't talked hardly anything at all about personal resilience, because that's one of those characteristics that is there. And, most of our trainees are pretty resilient. Most of you are all of us are very resilient, because you have to be in order to be an ER doc, and also to have gone through our training and experience. We roll with the punches, right? That's what that is. But the more one is able to roll with the punches, the more they can put up with stupid stuff and a system that's not perfect. But ideally, we would work on solving and creating a culture of well-being where the values of the organization are shared by the individuals, right? I don't think I said this before, but I like to think of the culture of wellness as like the esprit de corps, meaning like everybody matters to the organization and the organization matters to everybody. And communicating that as a value, super important. And then the efficiency of practice, the things that are in the way. And then the ABCD of self-determination. So think about these concepts and how they resonate with you yourself, as well as with your program. And, think about the gaps, right? Think about where there's a mismatch between the values of the individual and the values of the organization, and how those can become aligned. Look for the synergy. And that's where you will find your flow as well. Is what for you as a program leadership to really help create a process where everybody can work together to find the synergy in then everyone will feel collectively better, in particular you. So I'm going to end with going back to the concept of the reason we're all here, right? The reason we all do these jobs that we do is because they are what we love, right? It's important. It's what the world needs, what your program needs. You're good at it. You know, you wouldn't be still here if you weren't good at this stuff. And, you know, we can make a living doing it. So this is the flow state. This is where it all comes together. And this is so important to help yourself to think about this is why I'm here. This is, you know, what it all means, and to remind your trainees as well. I think this is just a really fun concept to help crystallize the whole to crystallize everything together. So, yeah, I think, should I leave this up while I entertain questions? Is there a chat? Or I could stop sharing. Maybe it'll be easier. What do you think, Dan? Should I stop sharing?
Sure. And I think we can give people a chance.
Yeah.
Certainly welcome anybody to come off mute or throw something in the chat for Pam. Otherwise, I always have something I can say.
Yes, you can call me Pam.
Yeah, one of the things you talk about, and you know, as burnout is often a situational. It's about the environment, and I think one of the challenges for program directors is that we are middle managers, and so we often don't have control over the environment. So I guess that's one of the questions I have is how do we help facilitate wellness for residents, for ourselves, in an environment where we actually have a lot less control than sometimes I think our learners think that we do, or that, you know, I don't know. I mean, I just feel like we're always sort of struggling with how to support people when we actually don't have full control over the environment.
It's a great question, Fiona. And it's one of the things I loved about being residency director and DIO was the middle management aspect of it. You know, what middle management means is representing the ideas and values of the higher above you and below you to each other, right? And so really leaning into the idea that, like, I think it's okay to show your work, you know. I think it's always a good idea to show your work and where the things are that you do and don't have control over. I think the residents get that. You know, you don't have control over the hours of the cafeteria, you know, like, if just a trivial example, but maybe happens to be a pain point. You know, our hospital is undergoing this giant construction project and the cafeteria was closed for a month, but the hospital did a real effort to create a situation where there was still food for the trainees. And so, you know, really representing to each other, those above and to the C-suite, or, you know, and to the trainees, or whichever, the department chair, you know, whoever it is that you're in the middle of, what is being done, you know, for them, and also what the values and concerns are of the trainees above, so that they can know. I think it's really creative and can be challenging and stressful, but it's also an opportunity to involve both directions in helping to better understand the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm Allison Haddock. I'm at Baylor College of Medicine. I'm working on a project where we're trying to help faculty in a group, not just individual faculty, kind of move up on the clinician educator milestones. And is there any intervention that stands out to you? It seems like for an individual, a coaching type intervention makes a lot of sense. But for a group of people, is there any intervention that stands out to you as a good way to kind of help progression on that one of the milestones in particular?
I think on the professional development one, on that particular milestone, I think, you know, learning about what the different concepts are, just exactly as I described them, is really all that's required. And being able to shift your, you know, take off one hat and put on another hat requires active thought, right? So I can wear my advising hat and know that that's what I'm doing. And I can shift into coaching mode and know that that's what I'm doing. But it comes from, what does the learner want from me? You know, do you want me to just listen? Do you want, you know, like you're talking to somebody, do you want me to just, like a friend, do you want me to just listen, or do you want me to help problem solve? And, or do you want me to help you come up with solutions, or do you want me to tell you what to do? And so I think that's the key there, is recognizing that there's a difference. And, sometimes when you have a problem, you just want to vent. Other times you want somebody to help you problem solve. And so just asking the individual you're speaking to, what do they want from you right then, is a great way to recognize those distinctions. It's a great question. Anybody else?
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was really awesome. Lots of learning, which is really, really helpful. So thanks. And thanks to everybody for being here late in the day for the East Coast people. So we appreciate that. And thanks so much to Dr. Dyne for taking the time out to put this together and share this with us. And as always, this will be available as a recording if you want to go back and look at some of the key points later. And then we'll see you all at CORD hopefully next month. It's very exciting.
In a couple weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.